I want to ask you a question, and I want to be honest with you about it up front. It is not a complicated question. It does not require an advanced degree. It does not require access to a classified archive or a translation of a dead language or a satellite scan of a jungle. You can answer it with things that are already written down in English in public documents that anyone can read tonight. Here it is. There was a time, and it is closer than you think, when 3 of the largest food supplies on the North American continent were free, not cheap, free. You did not need money, and you did not need permission, and you did not need land. You needed hands. The first one fell out of the trees, 4 billion of them, across a forest that ran from Maine to the Florida Panhandle and west to the Mississippi. 1 out of every 4 hardwood trees in the eastern United States was a chestnut, and every autumn they buried the ground in food, ankle deep, for free, every single year, forever. The second one flew. There were so many of them that a single flock was measured by a naturalist with a pencil, at over 2 billion birds. When they moved, the sky went dark at noon. Not as a figure of speech. People wrote in their diaries that they thought the world was ending. The third one walked. 30 million animals, some estimates say 60. A shifting, grazing protein supply the size of a nation that fed a continent of people for 10,000 years and never once sent an invoice. Free food, unlimited food, 3 separate, independent, apparently inexhaustible sources. Every one of them was gone by 1914, not reduced, not managed, not in decline. One was extinct. Every individual on Earth dead, with a documented time of death. One was down from 30 million to a number so small a single man could count it on one page. And the third was under a sentence it would never escape, in a forest where it had been the most common tree there was. 3 collapses. Nothing to do with each other. A market, a war policy, and a fungus. No connection, no shared cause. No reason on earth for them to have anything in common. Same few decades. And here is the question. It is the simple one I promised you. Something that feeds you for free forever is the most valuable thing a place can have. So how do you lose 3 of them inside one lifetime and not have that be the most famous story in your country's history? Why does everyone know 1914 as the year a war started in Europe, and nobody knows it as the year America's last free meal died on the floor of a cage in Ohio? You should know this. You don't. That silence by itself tells you something. I want to start with the birds, because the birds are the part people refuse to believe. When I started going through the accounts, I assumed they were exaggerations. Frontier, tall tales. The 19th century, writing in a big voice. Then I read the numbers written by the men whose entire job was not to exaggerate. Alexander Wilson essentially invented American ornithology. He was not a mystic, he was a cataloguer. And somewhere in Kentucky he sat down and did arithmetic on a flock passing over his head, the width of the column, the speed, the density, the hours, and came out with a figure of 2,230,000,000 birds in one flock. John James Audubon described a passage that took 3 days to pass overhead. 3 days. He wrote that the light of noon was dimmed as if by an eclipse and that the droppings fell like snow. There is a detail in those accounts that stopped me cold, and it is not the size, it is the sound. Witnesses say again and again that they could not hear the man standing next to them. Not the gunshots, the wings. A noise like a gale, like a train, like thunder that does not stop for hours, and in some cases for days. That was a food supply.
A squab, as a young pigeon, fat, easy, was one of the richest meals on the continent, and it cost you a stick. And the thing nobody tells you about that bird is that somebody had already solved it. permanently. The Seneca had rules, not customs, rules. You did not kill an adult bird at a nesting. That was the law. You watched the nests, and only when the chicks were 2 or 3 weeks old did you take the squabs. The young, the fat ones, the surplus. The adults were left to breed again.
There are accounts that they would not permit the cutting of a tree that held the nest of a chief pigeon. Hear that for what it is. A harvest quota, a closed season, and a habitat protection statute running on this continent for centuries before anybody here had a phrase for wildlife management. Take the interest, never touch the principle. That system worked for as long as anyone can measure. Here is the system that replaced it. In 1857, a bill came before the legislature of Ohio proposing some small protection for the passenger pigeon. A select committee of the Ohio Senate was assigned to look at it. They wrote a report, and the report killed the bill. I have read it maybe 40 times now, and it still does something to the back of my neck. The passenger pigeon needs no protection. Wonderfully prolific, having the vast forests of the north as its breeding grounds, traveling hundreds of miles in search of food, it is here today and elsewhere tomorrow, and no ordinary destruction can lessen them, or be missed from the myriads that are yearly produced. No ordinary destruction can lessen them. That is a state government of the United States in writing 57 years before the species ceased to exist. 21 years later, the pigeons came to nest at Petoskey, Michigan. The nesting was about 40 miles long and 3 to 10 miles wide, 150,000 acres of forest, 10 to 50 nests in a single tree. And here is the detail that turns this from a hunt into something else. The telegraph. 400 to 500 professional hunters were wired the location. The railroad came to meet them. This is not men feeding a family. This is a supply chain with a nesting colony at one end and a city market at the other. They netted them, they shot them. And when that was slow, they burned sulfur under the roosts to suffocate them out of the trees, and they cut down the trees with the nests still in them, 50,000 birds a day, for nearly 5 months. Every rule the Seneca had, not the adults, not at the nest, not the nest tree, every single one broken at industrial scale in one place, in one season. And the pigeon could not survive it, because that bird had made a bet over millions of years that it would always be in a colony too enormous to matter. Break the colony and it has no plan B. At minimum, 1.1 million birds left Petoskey by rail and boat. That is the documented flaw. The ones with a shipping record. Within 22 years, there were none left in the wild at all. If you are watching this and something about this is already pulling at you the way it pulled at me, that feeling that these things should not be sitting in the same file and yet here they are, then do something with it. Send this to the one person you know who won't let it go, and put what you know in the comments, because I'm not being polite when I say that. The conversations that start under videos like this one have taken me to sources I would never have found on my own. Somebody's grandfather kept a ledger, somebody's county has a photograph. That is genuinely how this kind of research works now, which is maybe exactly why it keeps getting harder to do. Now go west and watch it happen again to an animal 1,000 times the size. I am not going to give you a precise number for the bison because nobody honest has one. The estimates run from 30 million to 60 million, take the low one, 30 million. For 10,000 years that herd was the most reliable food supply on the continent, and the peoples of the plains built entire civilizations on it, not just eating it, but housing in it, clothing in it, tooling in it, a full economy on 4 legs. And it too was managed. It too was not simply taken. On the 10th of March 1874, the House of Representatives of the United States passed H.R. 921. Its title was to prevent the useless slaughter of buffaloes within the territories of the United States. It was not a radical bill. It made it illegal to kill a female bison. It fined you for killing more males than you could eat. And it specifically exempted the native peoples who lived on the herds. It passed the House, it passed the Senate, and it never became law because President Ulysses S. Grant never signed it. It was presented to him on the 17th of June. Congress adjourned on the 23rd. He let it die in his desk. A pocket veto. The kind that requires no explanation and leaves no argument on the record to answer. There is no veto message to debate because a pocket veto does not need one. The United States government had a law to save the buffalo sitting on the president's desk in 1874, and the law simply stopped existing, silently. The next year, when the Texas legislature took up its own protection bill, a buffalo hunter named John Cook later wrote that General Philip Sheridan appeared and argued against it. In Cook's telling, Sheridan said the hunters were doing more to settle the Indian question than the entire regular army had done in 40 years because, and this is the phrase, they were destroying the Indians' commissary. I have to be careful here, and I am going to be. That, quotes, paper trail runs through a hunter's memoir published in 1907, decades after the fact. Historians argue about it, and they are right to. I'm not going to tell you Sheridan said those words because I cannot put the document in front of you. Same for the line attributed to Colonel Richard Dodge. Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone, but I don't need the quote. A pocket veto is not a memoir. H.R. 921 is not a rumor. Those are in the record with dates on them. Whether or not any officer ever said that sentence out loud, a bill to stop the slaughter reached the President of the United States, and he let it die without a word. You do not need a quote about intent when you have a veto. By the 1st of January 1889, a man named William Temple Hornaday finished counting what was left. Not estimating, counting. He went and found them. 256 in captivity worldwide, 200 under government protection in Yellowstone, 635 still running wild, and 550 of those were not even in this country. They were up in the Athabasca country of Canada. 1,091 animals, 30 million to 1,091, and a man with a notebook could account for all of them personally by location. That is not a decline, that is a subtraction, which leaves the tree. And the tree is where this stops making sense, because you can explain the bird, greed, a telegraph, a railroad, and you can explain the animal, hides, a market, and a war that found a use for it. Both are about people wanting something, ugly but legible. A thing was valuable, so it was taken until there was none. The chestnut doesn't fit that at all. Nobody wanted the chestnut dead. There was no market in dead chestnuts. No war was helped by it. If you have never stood in front of a photograph of an American chestnut, go find one after this because the scale does not survive description. Trunks 10 and 12 feet across, straight as a mast for 50 feet before the first branch. They called them the redwoods of the East. And 1 in 4 trees in that forest was this one species, and it fed everything. Every autumn the mast came down in a quantity that has no modern comparison. Bears ate it, deer ate it, turkeys ate it. And people turned their hogs loose into the woods in the fall and did not feed them at all because the forest fed them. And in winter, those hogs were meat. Understand what that is. That is a protein supply that costs a family nothing. No feed, no grain, no land, no money. The mountains were full of people who were cash poor their whole lives and never went hungry in the fall because the trees paid out. They called it chestnutting. Children filled sacks, and the sacks became the year's shoes. In 1904, the chief forester of the New York Zoological Park in the Bronx, a man named Hermann Merkel, found something wrong with the chestnut trees on his grounds. Cankers in the bark, girdling the trunks, killing the crowns. It was a fungus. It had come in on imported Asian chestnut stock, and the Asian trees had lived with it so long they barely noticed it. The American tree had never met it, and had no answer at all. By 1906, 2 years, Merkel estimated it had infected 98% of the chestnuts in the borough. Then it went. About 50 miles a year on the wind into a forest where 1 in 4 trees was the thing it ate, 4 billion trees standing in a line. So that is an accident, a genuine one, and the official explanation here is not just reasonable, as far as I can tell, it's true. And that is exactly what makes the next part so hard for me to put down, because at some point I stopped reading them as 3 stories and put all 3 on 1 page by date. That is the whole method. There is nothing clever in it. Anyone can do it in an afternoon. Line them up. The bird, declared inexhaustible in writing by a committee of the Ohio Senate in 1857. Butchered at industrial scale at Petoskey in 1878, gone from the wild by 1900. The animal, a protection law passed by both houses of Congress and left to die on the president's desk in 1874, counted down to 1,091 by 1889. The tree, found infected in 1904, its rescue commission dissolved in 1913, and I'll get to 1913. Different kingdom of life, a bird, a mammal, a tree, different mechanism, a market, a policy, a pathogen, different half of the country, different men, almost none of whom ever heard of one another. Same window, not the same century, not the same half-century, the same few decades, roughly 1857 to 1914, a single human lifetime. A man born in the year Ohio declared the pigeon inexhaustible would have been 57 years old, not even an old man, when the last one died in Cincinnati. Now, there is no shared cause here, and I want to be as clear as I know how to be. I am not telling you that a fungus was a conspiracy.
A fungus is a fungus. It came off a boat. So the pattern is not in the biology. It can't be. And that is what took me so long to see, because I kept looking for it there. Here is where it actually is. In all 3 cases, the official position, in writing before the collapse, was that the thing was too abundant to need protecting. In all 3 cases, a formal attempt to protect it existed. A bill in Ohio, a bill in Congress,
a commission in Pennsylvania, and in all 3 cases that attempt was refused, unfunded, or left to die with no argument on the record at all, not fought, not debated and lost, refused quietly or simply not signed. That is the convergence. It is not in the fungus, and it is not in the rifle, it is in the paperwork. And then there is the thing that made me line them up in the first place. I went back and forth on whether to even tell you this because it proves nothing, and I need you to hold it loosely. Go back to that park in the Bronx in 1904 on the day Merkel walks in and reports the first chestnut blight in the Western Hemisphere. He reports it to his director. The man had been running that park since 1896, and he would run it until 1926, so he is sitting in that chair on that day without question. His name was William Temple Hornaday, the same William Temple Hornaday who, 15 years earlier, had counted every surviving bison on Earth and arrived at 1,091. And it goes further, and this is the part that keeps me up at night. In 1907, 3 years after the blight surfaced on his own grounds, Hornaday was president of the American Bison Society. And on the 11th of October of that year, 15 bison were loaded onto rail cars at that park in the Bronx and shipped to Oklahoma to put the animal back onto a plane it had been erased from. So stand in that spot. Stand in that one small piece of the Bronx in the first decade of the 20th century. Bison are being loaded onto a train to be sent back to the country that killed them, because the man who counted the last 1,000 of them lives here now. And in the trees over that train, the fungus that will erase 4 billion chestnuts is already working. It was identified on this property. It is going out on the same wind in the same year in the same country. 2 of the 3 collapses run through one gate, one institution, one man's line of sight. And down in Cincinnati, in a cage, there is a bird that nobody yet realizes is the last one. Now, this is exactly the point where a video like this one usually cheats, and I'm not going to. That is not evidence of a plot. Hornaday was not a villain. The man is arguably the reason there are any bison at all today. The blight arriving in his park is a coincidence of geography. The imports came through New York, the zoo had trees, and he happened to be the most famous animal man in America. 2 facts crossing in one place. I don't think the Bronx means anything. I think it's just the window I happened to be looking through when I finally saw the shape of the thing, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let me finish the third one because it ends in the same place as the other 2, and it is the cleanest example of the reflex I'm describing. Pennsylvania understood what was coming. They could watch it moving toward them at 50 miles a year. In June of 1911, the General Assembly created the Chestnut Tree Blight Disease Commission and put $275,000 behind it. Real money, serious money for a tree. Their plan was the only one anyone had. Get in front of it, find the isolated infections, cut them and burn them, and then cut a barrier, a strip of felled chestnuts 10 to 20 miles wide, west of the Susquehanna, so the thing would starve at the edge of an empty zone. Think about what that took. Sending men out to cut down thousands of perfectly healthy chestnut trees, the most valuable tree in the state, to save the rest of them. By the time they started cutting, the blight was already across the river. It was ahead of them. It had been ahead of them the whole time. And in late 1913, the legislature of Pennsylvania looked at the results and refused to appropriate another dollar. The commission dissolved, and after 1914, with a war on, and the thing now obviously hopeless, what money remained for chestnut blight research dried up across the board. Too abundant to protect, then too far gone to pay for. Same reflex, third species. And nobody in that room in Harrisburg in 1913 had ever read the Ohio Senate report from 1857. This raises a simple but critical question. Those 2 sentences cannot both be reasonable. There is a window between too abundant to protect and too late to protect. That window is the entire life of the problem. It is the only period in which anything could have been done. And in all 3 cases, a bird, an animal, a tree, 3 governments, 3 different decades, nothing happened inside it. And when the protection finally does arrive, look at when it arrives. In March of 1900, in Pike County, Ohio, a 14-year-old boy named Press Clay Southworth shot a strange bird off a barn. His family didn't know what it was. It was the last passenger pigeon ever confirmed in the wild, anywhere on Earth. 2 months later, or on the 25th of May 1900, President McKinley signed the Lacey Act, the first federal law in American history to protect wildlife. 2 months. The first federal protection for wild animals in the history of the United States arrived 8 weeks after the last wild individual of the most abundant bird on the continent was shot off a barn by a boy who didn't recognize it, and the federal law that would actually have protected that species, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, arrived in 1918, 4 years after the last one on Earth died in a cage. The protection is never early. It is never even on time. It arrives just after the thing it would have protected, close enough to look like an answer, and late enough to be nothing at all. Now the skeptic has an answer here, and it's a good one, and I want to put it as strongly as I can, because I have spent months trying to make it fit. The skeptic says this is not a pattern, it's a personality. It's what large institutions are. They don't act on slow problems because a slow problem never has a deadline and money always does. They wait until a thing is a crisis, and by the time a biological collapse is a crisis, it's arithmetic. It's already over. Nobody suppressed anything. 3 separate sets of ordinary men each made an ordinary mistake, and the mistakes rhyme because human institutions rhyme. Stupidity scales better than malice. I accept every word of that, genuinely. It is probably most of the answer, but it leaves the part I can't walk away from. Because look at how each one actually ends. Ohio wrote its report. The confident part is right there on paper and proud of itself. But the bill just quietly doesn't happen. Grant doesn't veto H.R. 921 in public. He lets the clock run out, which produces no document at all. Harrisburg doesn't announce that the chestnut is finished. The legislature simply declines to appropriate, and the commission stops existing. The optimism gets written down. The surrender never does. That is not what an accident looks like. An accident leaves a mess in the record. Arguments, dissents, a fight, somebody on the losing side putting their objection in writing. This leaves almost nothing. 3 times the single moment of decision is the one moment with no paper in it. And here is the part I genuinely cannot place. Every one of those 3 things was free. That is the only property all 3 of them share. Not a species, not a place, not a mechanism, a price. And the thing one free food supply has in common with another free food supply is that nobody in particular owns it, which means nobody in particular loses money when it dies, and nobody in particular has a reason to walk into a legislature and fight for it. I don't know whether that's a conspiracy or just the shape of how we decide things. I honestly don't. But it is not nothing, and it happened 3 times. So we come to 1914. In the Cincinnati Zoo, there was a bird in a cage. She was old. Nobody had confirmed a wild passenger pigeon in 14 years. There had been a reward offered for a mate. Anyone, anywhere, produce 1 bird. Nobody ever collected it. There was nothing to collect. She was mostly still by then. Visitors complained that she didn't move. There are accounts of people throwing sand at her to make her do something. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, on the 1st of September, 1914, she died on the floor of the cage. They called her Martha. And here is the detail I think about more than anything else in this whole story. They knew what they had. They knew standing there that this was not a dead bird. This was the end of a species. The first one anybody had ever been able to put a clock on. So they took her body to the Cincinnati Ice Company and they froze her into a 300-pound block of ice, and they put the block on an express train. And on the 4th of September 1914, the last passenger pigeon on Earth arrived at the Smithsonian. From 2 billion in a single flock, a number a man had to invent a method to even estimate, to 1 body in a block of ice with a shipping date. That is the year. 57 years after a committee of the Ohio Senate wrote that no ordinary destruction could lessen them. The buffalo never came back to being food. Hornaday's 15 animals on that rail car are a real part of why the species exists at all, and I'm not going to take that from him. But a herd of 30 million that fed a continent for free became a managed population inside a fence, and it has never fed anybody for free again. And the chestnut has an ending that I think is the most honest thing in this entire video. The trees kept dying for another 25 years. 4 billion of them standing dead in the mountains, and they were worth money dead. So they were cut. Salvage crews went in and took the corpses out of the hills, and because the trunks had stood there long enough for a beetle to tunnel through them, the lumber came out streaked and scarred and full of holes. They called it wormy chestnut. At first, nobody wanted it. It was damaged goods, the wood of a dead thing. Go and price it now. That flooring is a premium product. People pay for the beetle tracks because the beetle tracks are proof it came from a tree that no longer exists. That is the whole story in one board. The tree that fed people for free for nothing forever is now sold by the square foot as a luxury finish. And what you are paying for is the damage. The root systems are still alive out there, incidentally. They still send up shoots. The shoots get to about 20 feet, and the blight finds them and kills them, and they try again. They have been trying for 100 years. The tree does not know it lost. 3 unlimited free food sources, a bird, an animal, a tree. Nothing in common. All 3 finished inside one human lifetime, inside the same 40-year window. And every single time the record shows the same 2 sentences in the same order, and the second one is never signed. I want to say clearly what I am not saying. I cannot tell you there was a plan. I have no document that says a plan, and if I had one, I would put it on the screen. Whether what lines those 3 files up is a market that eats whatever is free, or a habit of government that only moves after the argument is already over, or something with more intent in it than that, I genuinely cannot tell you. I'm not telling you what to conclude. I'm telling you what is in the record. And the record is public. You can read the Ohio report and H.R. 921 and the Pennsylvania Commission's own publications yourself tonight. What I keep coming back to is smaller than a conspiracy, and it bothers me more. Every one of those 3 things was free, and within one lifetime all 3 were gone, and everything that replaced them you pay for. Your meat has a price now. Your protein has a price. The nuts in the store come from a tree in another country. Every one of those things used to fall out of the sky or off a branch or walk past your door and cost nothing. And the people who lived here before us had rules for keeping it that way, and those rules worked for centuries. Ours worked for about 50 years. So here is what I want in the comments, and I mean it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. What else was free? What else did this continent hand out for nothing that you now pay a bill for every month? Because I've started a list, and I am running out of ways to explain it as an accident, and I would genuinely rather be argued with than sit here agreeing with myself. Find me a natural explanation for 3 of them in the same lifetime. Find me an official one. I'll be here, waiting.